Welcome back to Let's Chat with Brandon and Tyler. Tyler had to go take care of a quick little dog appointment involving, it's like dog training thing. So he'll show up in a bit. Today we have another guest, this being Reverend James Heroux of Glenwood Moravian Church. Welcome to the pod.
Hey, Brandon, thanks for having me on. It is great to be here.
So we have, obviously this is a fledgling podcast right now, and we're planning on having it grow eventually. But I know everyone who will be listening to this in the future and who listen to it currently are wondering, who are in the world are the Moravians, and why are they called Easter people? Hence the episode of the podcast.
Well, they would not be alone in having that question. The amount of times people have heard that I'm a Moravian, and then, yes, the follow-up is, what is a Moravian? We are one of the oldest, if not the oldest, Protestant denomination. We go back to the 1400s with an early movement that was breaking away from the Catholic Church. And we've stayed a pretty small church since then. But through the years, made their way from the Czech Republic, modern day Czech Republic, to Germany, and then to a couple of settlements in the United States in the 1700s. And from there, continued mission movements that now is the worldwide Moravian Church, where most of modern day Moravians are in southern Africa. It's very small here in the United States, but it's booming in the southern part of Africa. Tanzania specifically has a lot of Moravians today.
And why are they called the Easter people exactly? I know I'm a part of the same denomination. I go to the church that you're the pastor at, but still.
Right. So I think there's two main reasons why we cling to the name of being Easter people. I think it originates from there's a community in Heroux, Germany. That's where the Moravians had a spiritual renewal that kind of took them from a place of feeling like they were fading away and maybe disappearing to going across the globe. And that community in Heroux for Easter morning would gather in the cemetery and have their Easter morning service there, really celebrating what we believe in the resurrection and the new life that faith in Jesus brings. So the tradition around Easter is very important to us. Cemetery services for sunrise. Many Moravian churches have a brass part to it with trombones and trumpets playing as the sun rises. So we really enjoy our Easter service. It's a special thing for us, but we're Easter people because we approach every time of worship as if it was its own mini version of Easter. We preach and teach and live in the good news of Easter morning. A lot of other churches will really focus on Old Testament laws and rules and creeds. We tend to not, it's not that doesn't matter, but we tend not to focus on that as much as living into the hope and the good news of Easter. That's where we are. And that's where we try to explore our faith from. So we're Easter people because every day should have something that leads to the hope and the life that is Jesus rising from the grave and bringing us new life.
And when you mentioned Herrnhut, that's where Zinzendorf did his whole, helped with the whole revival, and he gave the Moravians protection. He was a very interesting dude.
He was, yeah, from a German nobleman, Count Zinzendorf, welcoming Moravian refugees onto his estate, allowing them to kind of form a community there. And then he was so interested in them, moved by them, that he became a leader for them and a real key figure in inspiring them to not just focus on this little intentional community that they had, but to take what they experienced there and literally go across the globe with it. Under his leadership helped what was one of the greatest mission movements in Christian history, just really a bold sending of people to share the gospel and share the good news. And that was a big part of that was Zinzendorf and his belief in the Moravians.
Yeah, and I believe he either started and remained a Lutheran or started as a Lutheran and then swapped over to the Moravians. Am I correct on this? I read a book on Zinzendorf when I was recovering from, the main portion of my recovery from knee surgery. I was like, ooh, this is a good book. Oh my goodness, he is an intense dude.
You are not wrong. Yeah, he grew up Lutheran, but eventually he did become, I don't know if there was an official, but yeah, he was definitely Moravian towards the end of his life, and his wife was also a key figure in the Moravian church too, and in terms of empowering and encouraging women to positions of leadership. She was a big part of what kind of established an importance of celebrating and lifting women up, Benigna.
And then like people were wondering, like, was there a guy who started off the Moravians? That guy's name is John Huss, and that movement and the Moravian denomination is all essentially started 100 years before the Protestant Reformation.
Right. Yeah, we trace our spiritual roots to John Huss, who was a Catholic priest in the Czech Republic. He was a professor at the University of Prague, and he started to have some frustrations with some practices in the Catholic Church and was very vocal about them, and became a real problem for the church. And they excommunicated him, threatened him with punishment and death if he wouldn't recant what he was teaching. And he believed so firmly that the church needed to change that he wasn't willing to take back what he said. He felt like he was preaching the good word and he didn't feel like he was wrong, so he wouldn't recant. They burned him at the stake, and the Hussites who followed John Huss continued on, and some of their disciples made their way to founding the Unity of the Brethren in Grunwald. Gregory the Patriarch was the one who followed the teachings of Huss. I think it was about 50 years after his death when the church was officially formed, but it spent some time moving and trying to survive as the Catholic Church tried to squash their movement. They were in exile and hiding, but eventually were able to establish a church that reflected the vision that he had.
And the next question would be, how did you become a pastor? Like the whole journey from undergrad, figuring out something, going off to seminary.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up, we grew up at the same church, Sturgeon Weaver.
We very much did.
Same home pastor, because Pastor Matt's been there for nearly 30 years now.
Yeah, he has.
It's been a while. But
and you studied underneath him too, I believe, for a little bit.
Yeah. And like many kids who went through that church, we really looked up to Pastor Matt. And as when I was a junior high school kid, just kind of gravitated toward him and was always interested in the work that he did. And there was just a flicker in the back of my mind of like, well, maybe that's something I could do after school. And it never really progressed from there. But I went to undergrad at University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. I got a business administration degree because that was broad enough and vague enough to do something. And I didn't really have an idea of what that would be. But I got a job out of school, working in sales, doing the
Sales.
classic cubicle and 8 to 5 sort of life. And it took about 4 or 5 months before I knew pretty firmly that I could not do that for 40 working years.
I was surprised I did sales for like a year and a half, 2 years.
I mean, for some people, it's their jam, but man, it was not the fit for me.
No.
So when I knew that wasn't the route, I really started thinking, okay, if I make a switch, what will be a sure thing? What won't be, a dead end where I feel like I'm just stuck? And the thought of becoming a pastor came back around. So I called Pastor Matt and told him I was thinking that I was, coming out of left field to him saying, I have this job and it's not really going well. I'm wondering if maybe I should start seminary and become a pastor. And after I gave him my spiel, he said, James, I've been waiting for you to make this phone call for a long time. So clearly he had some sort of inkling, even though we've never discussed it before. For about half a year, I shadowed Pastor Matt, was kind of an unofficial intern for him. Went on visits with him, helped with youth group, helped with worship leadership while I was applying for seminary and going through that process. And the more I did with Matt, the more it felt like it was a really good fit. Like it was something I was meant to do. And then got accepted to seminary. The Moravian seminary in the United States is in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And so I enrolled there in 2015. And that was, nowadays with the advent of COVID and distance learning, you can get your MDiv from wherever you are. But we were still in the class where going to seminary meant moving to Bethlehem. So I moved out there for 3 years, getting my Master's of Divinity before graduating.
And that is Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, if people were wondering where that is, because there's various different Bethlehems around the world.
Yes, not the Bethlehem. I had to make that correction a couple times with friends who were curious of where I landed for a little while. Yeah.
Yep. And hey, Tyler, welcome in.
Hello. Sorry.
Hey,
I was at a training with the dog.
All good. Good to be with you.
Yes, good to be with you. What has Brandon asked as of right now?
I've gone over John Huss, Zinzendorf, who are the Moravians, why they're the Easter people, things, and then James Root into seminary, into becoming a pastor.
Okay.
Anyways, wait, Tyler, you have a question for him before I ask him another?
Yeah. How long have you been a pastor?
I have been ordained. It will be 7 years this summer. I spent 5 years serving Freedom Moravian, which is in a little town just about 10 minutes north of Appleton, Wisconsin, a small country church up there. And then my wife and I moved to Madison in November of 2023 to start serving here at Glenwood. So it'll be 7 years this summer.
Okay.
And when you started at Glenwood, the same day I attended my first service there.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, I remember that specifically. It was interesting because they're like, yeah, we got a new pastor. I was like, when I saw you, I was like, oh my goodness, I know you.
It was just by chance? You would just
yeah, it was literally just by sheer chance that happened. Because when I found out, I'm like, wow, it's like everyone from like college and growing up in Sturgeon Bay, just as everything's just kind of converging in the Madison area.
Right, and it was a trombone Sunday, so you had the brass music going. That was a good first Sunday to stroll in for.
Oh, yeah, indeed it was.
I got another question. So I was raised Catholic. I was baptized twice, communionized once, and confirmed once. I believe that there are spirits, angels, demons out there, as so does the Catholic faith. Do you have your own angels and demons in Moravian?
We, I I don't think the Moravian Church has an
I don't think it's anything
official.
specific.
Yeah,
I think it's the same ones as the Catholics do, I believe. I could be wrong.
Yeah. It's not something we talk about often, but it's definitely in the Moravian Church. It is a very kind of spiritual and heart-led faith. So whatever personal experiences someone has is kind of part of their spiritual journey. And I don't know if we have an official understanding that we draw from, but we certainly sit and listen with each person's experience to walk with whatever they might be going through, whether that's, as you said, angels or feelings of demons. It's definitely stuff that takes place within our faith, but it's not something we have official doctrine or language for.
Okay. Yeah, like the Moravian faith is very simple. For example, I'd like to say Pastor Matt gave a sermon and said, like, while other denominations have these long confessions of faith, like Moravians have it down to 3 words: Jesus is Lord. That's it.
Yeah, we certainly are not. We do not have a long list of creeds or confessions of faith. It is very much leaning on the simple side of being inspired by Jesus and hoping to translate his life somehow in our own. And part of one of the few official documents we have came out of the community in Heroux when they were with Zinzendorf, something called the Covenant of Christian Living, which is pretty much how do we relate to one another as Christians and live in community with each other. But part of the statement they made refers to our approach to Scripture, and there's a line in there that says, "We decline to determine as binding what Scripture has left undetermined." So really an official way of saying we don't know about a great many things, and we're not interested in pretending like we have the answers. So it's a heart thing. It's a follow Jesus thing. And it's not so much getting to a level of perfect faith with creeds and confessions that we try to write.
And it's like we believe all that stuff exists and is real. It's just we just don't know.
Yeah. Yep. I think especially when it comes to interpreting the Bible, Moravians are across the entire spectrum of. There are some Moravians who have a scientific view of the Bible, that this is literal, this is exactly how things happened, and every story is exact. And other Moravians will say, it's poetry, it's meant to teach us something, there's exaggeration, and we're all Moravians, but we can hold those differences as long as we can work with one another, be in community. We leave space for pretty serious differences in opinion and belief. So yeah, that's one of the things I really enjoy about being Moravian, is that we have room for disagreements that so far have not been deal breakers. We haven't split into separate churches over some of these differences.
Yeah, and like other denominations have. So here's a good question for you. So just and a little bit of background for the listeners. The Moravians are rooted in pacifism. So when I know that the Hussite Wars were a thing, like post-martyrdom of John Huss, but due to the pacifism, was it more of a genocide, or were they literal battles that happened post the martyrdom?
They were. I mean, the Hussite Wars were. Yeah, they were wars. That the Hussites were definitely active in in fighting. They put up, I think from what I can remember, they put up more of a resistance than the Catholic Church expected. But yeah, our claim to pacifism is pretty idyllic. We hope to be pacifists, but that certainly has not been the reality in the history of our church. There have been some blemishes where we've lost sight of that.
Yeah, most definitely. And it was like, I know there was a genocide like during near the end of the Revolutionary War, somewhere in there, but in the beginning, yeah, I looked at that, I was like, it calls, like, was it self-defense? Possibly.
Right. Yeah, they were definitely, at least for the Hussites, they were definitely targeted and under threat. So, but yeah, there was, it may be the one you're referencing. Well, I'm not sure. There was a community in Ohio, the Moravians.
Yes, I can't pronounce the full name of it.
Gnadenhutten, I think.
Yeah.
Or I could be wrong about that. But yes, there was some quite horrific violence between the Moravians and the indigenous people there. That does not look great for our Moravian history, for sure.
Yeah. And then another one for you is, last year the Bible sales were up 22%. A good portion of those were new purchases. Some of them were people wanting new copies or different translation. And Christianity has actually been on the rise. Like, where you see a line, there was an article a while ago where, I don't know if it was a while ago or if it was a couple weeks or something like that. Either way, it was like you see this line going downwards for Christianity in the US, and then it just stopped. And Christianity, for the most part, has been on the rise again, except it's mostly been in the Orthodox and Catholic churches. And it turns out a lot of these young people are looking for traditionalism. So for people who are looking to join a church or a place to explore their faith, why would they want to check out the Moravian church rather than a Catholic or Orthodox?
Well, a lot will depend on their, I guess, previous faith experience, what they might be used to or comfortable with, because some people certainly do appreciate the traditions and customs of a certain denomination over another. But I'd say the appeal to the Moravian church, that someone who's seeking a faith community, something they might find, the Moravian church is a great place to ask questions, to wrestle with belief and doubt, to be a completely unfinished product. And it's something that we say publicly, and in my experiences of various Moravian churches, the setting is very welcoming and very inclusive for people who might have something about them, whether it's their race or gender or sexual orientation. They might have something where they are thinking, something about me is classic to be rejected or criticized by the church, whatever that assumption might be. And in my experience, that has not been the case in Moravian settings. The Moravian church is happy that you walk through the door and will accept you as you are. I think that's the big thing that, at least here in our congregation, that has been something that a younger crowd is starting to see and really lean into. That whatever baggage the word church has, it might not be a reality if you check out a Moravian church. You might be pleasantly surprised that fears of judgment or rules isn't really the setting that we exist in.
No, and like I think I was in sales when I was like, wow, I kind of missed going to church, and I started taking my faith more seriously when I was younger. It wasn't nearly as serious, and that's when I got some level of interest in theology. So, like early church stuff and who these guys were, how do they believe things, more like their biographies and autobiographies, and of course the councils and creeds written from like early church before the Great Schism and all that. And when I walked into Glenwood, and then I think you had a sermon or a story about people greeting each other as brother and sister, and then everyone treated each other like that at Glenwood, which is a very nice experience. I'm one who loves the community atmosphere of a lot of stuff. You don't get that a lot anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that I think that is one of the gifts of Moravian churches in the United States, particularly, or generally small congregations.
Yes, it's always been like that. Like I think it was the Zinzendorf book or a different book that I read where for a long time, like the general populations of the Moravians were around like 500 some thousand.
Yeah, and like you said, the community aspect. I think there's part of us that we see X amount of people in worship, if it's 40 or 50, and our hope, our dream is that the pews are full and that we're overflowing with people. Then the church is doing really well, which would be wonderful. But the close knit aspect at a lot of smaller, I think we grew up at Church of a Moravian, which is a church of 300, 400 people. And it
was like that. And then went down to like 100 or 200.
Okay.
I could be wrong.
There's something to the community being a little smaller, that people really, they know each other well. They know what is going on in their lives. And you really feel seen when it's a group that small. They really look after each other. And it could be something that you start to lose once the numbers go way up. There might be a feeling that you're just one in the crowd, but that certainly is not the case in many Moravian churches, because we are pretty small. We're quite small.
Yeah, hence why not a lot of people know about us. And then I know I have one more question on my little list of, do you know how the Moravians got entwined with music and why the two are considered inseparable? I got this question after I played a piece called Moravian Polka with the Sun Prairie Community Band.
So how is music and the Moravian church
so intertwined, basically? I poorly typed up the question, and I had a little arrow next to it that said, maybe ask this? Maybe?
Yeah, it really is something we take a lot of pride in. It might go back to, we, through the work of John Huss, we were the first denomination to make a hymnal for congregational singing. That was part of translating the Bible into the native language of whatever group is there. So congregational singing was something that kind of gained momentum through the very early Moravians. And Zinzendorf also, along with his vision for mission work, he was a prolific hymn writer and would write lyrics upon lyrics for several of their more popular tunes. And then I don't know enough specifically about where our affinity towards brass comes from. I know it probably has something to do with that initial practice of having an Easter morning service in the cemetery, and the brass band was there. So maybe it just kind of was cemented from that. But if you're talking Moravian music and you're really looking into it, you are most often going to come across wonderful brass music. And I don't know specifically how that became our thing, but it's certainly a really important part of a lot of Moravian worship is incorporating brass and hearing at Glenwood once a month. We have our trombone choir play, and
Typically, it's like the third month, like third Sunday of each month.
Yep. And the people here just the choir here has been going for over 40 years, and the church just loves it. It's such a nice and an appreciated service every month when the trombone choir is there. And the cool thing about the trombone choir is if there's 12 or 14 people playing any given Sunday, I'm trying to think, 5 or 6 of them at most are Moravians. It's a very ecumenical group, which is just a perfect reflection of the Moravian church, that we get along well with others. So the fact that the trombone choir has such a variety of faith backgrounds is just appropriate in many ways. I really enjoy that.
Well, it's like I got sucked into playing in that group shortly after I got out of sales and started working at iHeart as Vicky McKenna's producer. And then we, of course, in February, we were going to have me wheel my tuba in so we can play Down in the River to Pray. Yes, that gospel tune. And then I obviously had my injury. And since I returned back, I asked Dr. Olson, hey, Mike, when are we going to play this thing? You think it's going to be ready soon? And he said, I don't know if it'll be right for prime time in May, but it'll be sometime this year.
All right. Well, we will look forward to it with great anticipation whenever it is able to take shape.
Tyler, you got any more questions for him?
I got nothing.
Got nothing? All right. Well, as always, you can contact Tyler and I at letschatbt@gmail.com, on X, on the Facebook community group, and you can follow us on the Facebook page that we generally put our announcements on, and where we share, hey, here are some of the uploads for the episodes, and I'll do the same thing on the X account. Also, download, like, follow, wherever you need to do to increase the popularity of the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Rating it 5 stars does help. Any last thoughts from either of you two?
It was not good having Pastor James on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you guys for having me on. It was great to chat. Good to be with you.
Yeah, no problem.
Of course. And in the description of this podcast, I will put the YouTube channels for the Sturgeon Bay Moravian Church, the Glenwood Moravian Church, and maybe a couple others. So anyone who wants to check out a service and they're not near Moravian Church, they're welcome to check out one of the services or prior services on the YouTube channels. Otherwise, James, you're welcome to come back onto the pod whenever.
All right, just let me know.
And I'll just say our next subject will be the opening week of baseball starting tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. for our recording. And we will also be talking about the recently uploaded Nintendo Direct and the Switch 2.
Oh, yes, that expensive monster. All right. You'll hear from us tomorrow, everyone.